big thanks and hello to Herb, the founder and CEO of Thinking Digital, the Northeast's leading annual digital and tech conference, and one of Europe's best-known events of its kind. In addition to Thinking Digital, Herb is also the creator of TEDx Manchester, TEDx Liverpool, and TEDxNewcastle, and the Liverpool Binary Festival. Herb's conferences are a mix of themes around technology, new ideas, and our future, and they attract people from a variety of industries and functions. By bringing a large number and a variety of some of the brightest, most innovative and accomplished thinkers and doers from around the world, Thinking Digital really does create a unique experience that provokes and inspires new insights into our businesses and organisations, as well as connecting delegates into a vital community that lives on well after the conference concludes. Well done on what you've achieved so far, Herb. You must be so proud of the event brands that you've built and the following and recognition that you've received since their inception sort of back in 2008. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about how it all started, the Thinking Digital journey for you?
Sure, yeah. So back in 2006, I was actually 2005. I was the CEO of something called CodeWorks, which I'm sure you remember, but for your audience, was effectively a publicly funded organization set up by the former regional development agency, War Northeast, to sort of hothouse the digital creative sector of the Northeast. And as part of that, we were looking for some sort of project that we felt could really kind of help put the Northeast on the map. There's actually a huge, there's a whole presentation just on this, but I won't go into that obviously right now. I came in searching for something, that we felt could really make a big impact. I came across something called the TED conference. This is 2005.
Yeah.
And this is pre-TED Talk, so the TED conference was a lot less famous than it is today. And I managed to find a way to get into a TED conference in California. It was held in California at the time. Yeah. And I just was blown away by the whole experience. It was literally a life-changing experience for me, and for a whole variety of reasons. Primarily, I just felt really reconnected into learning. I mean, we've all been to conferences and trade shows and exhibitions and the like, and the reality is it's usually pretty exhausting. You kind of hope to pick out a few nuggets of either an interesting talk or a chance meeting with somebody that was at the event, and you kind of get two or three nuggets that you kind of justify the days that you oftentimes put into these things. And for me, it was a 4-day event, and I was glued to my seat. It was like as if I was watching an amazing thriller, for 4 days, and from 8:30 a.m. I think it started at 8:30 a.m. or something like that, and went till like 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, and then there were the after parties, and I just soaked it all up, and I would come home after the after parties at whatever 10, 11 o'clock, sometimes later in some cases, and be still bursting with energy. So anyways, I came back to Newcastle, and I said, I know what we want to do. We want to try and put on a TED style conference. There was no TEDx at the time. Yeah. And so we just said, we'll just do our own thing. We did actually email TED saying, hey, could we license TED? Right. Never heard back from them, not surprisingly. And so then we just came up with our own thing, Thinking Digital. And that was, we launched it in 2007. The first conference 2008. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, part of the reason that we did is that we were already doing events. I mean, nothing nearly as complex as that, but we were, we'd started with after work networking events, and then a half-day conference, and then we did a full-day conference. And, it turned out we were naturally very good as an organization at putting these events on for whatever reason. It wasn't part of the plan really when we started it. So, but this conference was, I mean, it nearly was the end of the company, because it cost a hell of a lot more to do. But the biggest thing, as you probably know, since I know you do obviously some events yourself, is just building the audience, and building an audience that would actually be willing to pay to attend, and to some extent, building an audience is actually more difficult than finding the sponsorship, which, you would have thought, to some extent, logically, you would have thought finding the sponsors would be more difficult. For whatever reason, for us, it was the opposite. And so, I mean, the first year was just so bloody difficult. And we were basically, I mean, the entire organization was roped into trying, into helping us get this thing off the ground. And I say we got there with what was, it was a face-saving amount of people. It was hardly sold out, but and it turned out that the venue that we were using was actually pretty good at hiding the emptiness.
Okay.
We made so many rookie mistakes. I mean, for example, we had, it was the first conference was actually a full 2.5 days, and the second day it went till 5:30 p.m. on Friday, right? Which you just think, I can hear you groaning at the idea of trying to keep people there after 2.5 days until 5:30. Anyways, but I mean, luckily we survived. I'd say the appropriate was we survived it. And the important thing is, and this is probably a little bit like launching lots of businesses, is that the people who did come absolutely really responded well to the concept, and they really loved what they saw, and they gave us tons of feedback as to what they liked, what they didn't like, and really kind of helped us shape for the next year. And then by the next year, I mean, the other thing that helped was that this was just the beginning of things like Twitter. If you cast your mind back to 2008, right? Twitter was still a big novelty even amongst tech people, right? And we were still living in a time where people were as much making fun of it as they were using it, right? And but the people who came to a conference called Thinking Digital, not surprisingly, a lot of them were pretty involved in the early days of Twitter, and they really helped promote the conference for us in a way. It was that, I guess, it was certainly a heavy dose of word of mouth that really made the difference between 2008 and 2009. And 2009, we were able to sell out the conference. Where, I mean, it was just so much easier. It was ridiculous, and we didn't actually even. I mean, we didn't know that like this Twitter thing was going to be an important thing for us, right? It just happened. And and it was a kind of a lovely period where, I guess, there's a feeling today that a lot of social media stuff is more engineered. I mean, obviously, whether it's the Russians influencing elections or whatever. Whereas back then it felt a lot more, I guess, authentic, if you will. And of course, also back then there were far fewer people using it, so there was a lot less noise on the system. So, anyways, so that and then by 2010, it started getting national recognition. We made we were in the top 100, list for Media Guardian in 2010, and then we were in the Wired 100 in 2011, and so I mean, it's putting on an event even after it's established is never easy, but it certainly got easier. At least we could now increasingly focus on the product's quality versus just begging people to come. So that was the early days. It was it's the kind of thing, if I knew what I was getting myself into at the time, I might never have ever done it in the first place. It was definitely amongst the most stressful things of put myself in, not just me, but the people that worked with me on it. It was a hard time. But so that was the beginning. And how go again. I could go on. There's
Yeah.
even more context, but I think that's probably enough for your
Yeah.
audience.
No, I get it. Cool. No, that's great. And through to so I suppose since 2010, prior to last year particularly, so over the sort of 9-10 year period, how did it develop from there? Did you sort of back towards 2010 times have a good level of audience, and then it was just about sort of evolving that audience over the years, or has it grown consistently since that period? Has there been any particular moments in time that were really pivoting post those sort of first 3 or 4 years when you'd launched the
Well, I mean,
conference?
the big thing for us was in 2010. The original David Cameron coalition government was elected into office, and
Okay.
obviously Labour left. And one of the first big things that they did was effectively shut down the old regional development agencies,
Yeah.
and which meant that our funder was going to be gone. And
Yeah.
so I was faced with a real choice about, like, what the hell do I do with this thing? Like, I was so much of my, I guess, personal and professional reputation was now linked to Thinking Digital at that point. And so I mean, we were able to successfully sell off our other conference assets, and Codeworks Connect went on to was bought by Gateshead Council, which then it got turned into Digital Union, which of course today is being run by Generator.
Yeah.
And so the thing about the conference as well is that it's not really an investable property unless you get a very sympathetic investor like your parents or something like that. And so I sold my house in Liverpool, and I used the money to buy. I mean, to some extent. I had to pay for the rights to Thinking Digital as well as the assets, and so I bought that from the old company, and then I set up a new company, and so I was very much, I guess, became an accidental entrepreneur, where it was never part of my plan. I mean, I'm very happy been promoting and cheerleading for entrepreneurs, but I didn't see myself becoming one per se. And so that was, we set up the company in 2012. After a lifetime of effectively working for and in companies, I suddenly now had one. And it was it's been a massive education for me. I've gone to business school, but this was kind of like the real business school, was actually running a company for yourself, sort of thing. So so that's been a huge change for me, certainly personally. But the positive thing again was, I guess, we had enough goodwill with the community that they were willing to kind of like, I mean, our fear was kind of like, people that go, oh, right, so now it's gone, it's like, it's no longer attached to Codeworks, it's no longer attached to the RDA. Maybe we'll just give it a year and see what happens before we, sponsor again or attend and things like that. But it certainly, from an audience sponsor point of view, it was more or less seamless. I'd say, if anything, actually, there seemed like there was actually more sympathy.
Wow.
Like they kind of wanted to support this now, I guess, private effort to keep the thing going. So
Great.
So I mean, that was that was a big moment. And I think the positive thing was that I mean, we'd also launched all the TEDx's that you mentioned in 2009, but they were always a kind of, I mean, I wouldn't say side project, but like, they weren't being held annually. They were kind of as and when we could find a sponsor and things like that, and we would do it and things like that. And when we set up the company, just thought, well, we should really kind of invest more into these TEDx events as well, and kind of give them kind of equal footing next to Thinking Digital, because they're great in themselves, and TED's obviously built an amazing brand, and so I mean, that was I guess another positive thing of going independent. Actually allowed us to be, I guess, I don't know, bolder in terms of
Yeah.
developing these other properties.
Great. Yeah, and it gives you that flexibility to make those decisions, and for yourself, well, in the best interest of the company, in a sort of more flexible and agile way, I guess. One of the defining elements of thinking digital and TEDx, where you took the original inspiration, is the sort of diversity and innovative nature of the speakers, really, and that's always come across for me with thinking digital. It's a very sort of relatively eclectic, I'd say, diverse sort of range of speakers from different areas of the sort of digital tech, more innovative business community areas. How do you go about choosing the speaker lineup? I'm not asking you to give away any sort of trade secrets, if you like, but genuinely interested in where you take your inspiration from, because it seems like whilst there's a consistency certainly behind the brand and the types of speakers in terms of industries that they may be in, but there's that diversity as well. So I wouldn't say it's formulaic by any stretch, which is a compliment really to how you've developed those the events that you put on. So it's, where do you take the inspiration from? Where do you find these speakers that you put on?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, the underlying thing is because I still do a lot of it myself, but I have a bit more help these days. But is ultimately it just reflects the fact that I am just interested in a huge variety of different things, and so whether it be science, whether it be technology, whether it be digital, which I can separate from technology, whether it be entrepreneurship or business. I'm fascinated by new tech startups, and I'm also fascinated by what Disney's doing, and or Nike, or so which are all, obviously they're massively different companies and massively different industries, but also the arts, and more academic things, and I find value and interest in so many different areas, and I think that's true of, I would say, certainly many, if not most, creative people, right? That are just curious about the world, and I think that's I think part of perhaps why people enjoy their unique experiences outside of meeting people and partying, is that you're effectively being asked to explore a wide variety of different subjects, right? And not all of them are equally interesting, clearly, but and I think we kind of lose, perhaps, I think so much of learning becomes a lot more functional post university, right? Where it's like you need to learn X, Y, and Z for your job ultimately, right? And whether that's in the form of a conference or other forms of learning. And I just think, for me personally, which I think is obviously seems to be true for a wider audience, really get something out of that kind of variety. So, anyways, the programming is a reflection of my own interest, basically, which I think a lot of successful ventures, ultimately, the person that's at the center of it, they just genuinely are interested in, whether it be tech or whatever it might be. That's their back, if you will. And then often the challenge is actually being able to extend beyond the interest, if you will, and being able to scale effectively what you're doing. And then I think if you look at what we do, I really see ourselves as much more of a research company. A lot of people, obviously people see conferences as, you're a conference governor, you're a conference producer and all that sort of stuff, right? And so part of the learning and scaling is actually being able to find the other half, if you will. Oftentimes, like what you do, you'll have people that are very good at tech, but they might not be so good at, say, client management or or just is sending invoices on time.
Yeah, sure.
And stuff like that, right? And so, obviously with the, so if you think about us as a research company, we're naturally curious about people and topics.
Yeah.
That we didn't research those things. Obviously, there's an element of then I'll be getting in touch and recruiting them and all that sort of jazz.
Yeah.
But the conferences effectively are almost like our research presentations, but attached with that is obviously serving, hundreds, in some cases thousands of people simultaneously.
Yeah.
And that's a totally different beast from the research aspect, right? And just think about being able to coordinate, 2,300 people leaving a venue at the same time and then coming back and, making sure that there are sufficient water and coffee and all that sort of jazz, and you've probably been in events where they have screwed up those logistics, and it does actually have an impact on your experience. So that's, I think, for us, it's just a genuine, it's something that we're being paid to do research. And I think that's what makes us different from a lot of conference companies per se.
It's a really interesting way to look at it, and really gives me greater insight into the approach that you take. What I would say is, which again is testament to what you've created, is compared to other sort of conferences that exist, particularly in sort of digital marketing tech space, you sort of know from the narrative around the conference the type of content that will probably come next year, at least a percentage of the type of contextual flow that the conference may have. Whereas the testament to yourself really of building the Thinking Digital brand, because there is that variety, you're almost asking for people to build trust in the brand, whether consciously or not, because there isn't that formulaic approach of, well, I know that if I buy my ticket to go to Thinking Digital, I'm going to get X, Y, Z, because that's, I know there's obviously some consistency there, but it's the Thinking Digital brand that you built up where, the consumer will look at it and say, right, well, I know that if I give up my time and my finances to go to that conference, I'm going to get good quality. And actually, I quite like the variety. I quite like the variety and the fact that it's off this research approach. It's off Herb's idea of, what's good and interesting out there. And, that's real testament to the brand you've created over the last 13, 14 years.
Well, thank you. That's exactly, that's exactly it. I mean, that's part of the reason that we don't work that much with other conferences is because, ultimately, so if you're doing a tech conference, and you want to make money, and your primary goal is to basically make money or to just have an easy life, it's just you get someone from Amazon, you get someone from Facebook, you get someone, you just go down to all the big brands, and which is why oftentimes you'll see fairly junior people being on these lineups because they're Twitter. So even if they're, not necessarily either, and oftentimes they're not necessarily great speakers and things like that. So, I mean, that's obviously another thing that we have to either filter for or work with, is to make sure that the actual presentation itself is obviously up to par.
Yeah. Is that something you prepare? Like, I know, like, obviously my wife spoke at TEDxNewcastle, and I know that. The audience don't necessarily know that. So I know the process that she went through, and the due diligence that you sort of shared there. But is how do you approach that? Because I know, being involved in events myself, in a different type of approach, I suppose, with it not being our main business. But I know from that experience that, yes, we vet the presentations, but I think in the instance of yourselves, it sounds like, the quality of the speaker and how you reassure yourselves as organisers that has to be, of a quality to meet the brand, really, the brand expectations and therefore the expectations of people attending. How do you go about that?
So one, it's it's kind of like, part of having a great, I guess, if you will, employee is, the first thing is making sure you hire the right person in the first place. That's probably 90% of the battle, right? And so we do, we do look for people that, have some ability to be presentable. Not
Yeah.
everyone's going to be, Malcolm Gladwell or, Sir Tony Robbins or whoever sort of thing, So, and then on top of that, we then work with them to come up with effectively a format for the talk. And a lot of people, I'd say particularly academics, actually are not used to using narrative in their presentations. They tend to be a lot more, data and information transmission oriented, I'd say.
Yeah.
And so, and so we have a sort of minimum amount of contact that we'll have with each speaker. Some will be fairly resistant to, they'll just want to give ultimately the bare minimum.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's because they are genuinely either professional or semi-pros at this, and they're kind of like, listen, I got this.
Yeah.
Sometimes they perhaps, they don't know what they're kind of getting themselves into. And so, we've learned along the way as to kind of what to look for. And one interesting thing I think is, as well as that, I'd say is that one of the things we've learned is that people who are very extroverted, they're actually the ones you have to watch out for, and it's deceiving because they're naturally extroverted and things like that, and that it means, of course, when you speak to them on the phone, it's usually a great conversation about a huge variety of topics, including their own talk, sort of thing. And I think with extroverts, they have the conversation as well, and they kind of go, I've got this nailed.
Yeah.
I'm going to be able to walk this. There's no problem. And so perhaps they don't kind of really put in the time. I mean, extroverts also tend to be, they have tons of interests as well, and they tend to overextend themselves and all that sort of stuff. And so, whereas with introverts, people who trend more introvert, because they live in abject fear of the presentation, they prepare the hell out of it, right? And they're willing to, just basically put in a lot of time and and really, and I've never had, I guess, if you will, a bad presentation. In fact, they're usually amongst the very best. So
yeah, brilliant. And fast forward to the present day, 2021 goes without saying. The last 12 months have been challenging in many ways, none more so than for, I suppose, the events and conferences industry as a whole.
That would be a fair statement.
Yeah. I have a number of friends who work in the sector, and obviously, it's no secret, is it, that it's been challenged. And coming out of that period, it strikes me, amongst a small number of others, because of the nature of sort of face-to-face conferences and events, that perhaps it's anticipated to be one of the sort of slowest to recover, for want of a better phrase, potentially. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of uncertainties, isn't there, as we go through this year and beyond. But in the context of that, what's your plans, if you can have plans at the moment, for sort of Thinking Digital, TEDx? Is there anything you can share around what you're hoping to achieve?
We're basically a prisoner of government guidance right at the moment, right? And so I guess the plan currently is for something like June, although I don't know for events whether or not physical in-person events will be allowed in June, but I think possibly they will be. Our main venue in Newcastle is the Sage Gateshead, and they are at the moment they're talking about September being their reopening to the public time.
Yeah.
That could be moved up, I suppose, if things go well. Obviously, could be moved back if progress is stalled in terms of the R0 number and other such metrics. So, I mean, it is pretty much wait and see for us. And then, of course, even if, let's say, everything goes swimmingly well in June, everything's reopened again, and there's no more social distancing, even, I can't tell you how quickly. I mean,
Yeah,
I think there's a significant, hopefully, majority of our market that you will be just desperate to come back, right?
yeah,
And but there'll be, also a portion of the market be like, well, I'm not quite sure I'm ready to rush back into a crowded venue with
yeah,
such things and things like that. So, and to be honest, it'd also probably be influenced by how quickly things like sporting events come back.
yeah,
And
yeah,
if you are seeing, I don't know, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 people, not just here but across the world, and people don't get sick after it, then that'll probably help. So it's I think I think this is I mean had we had perhaps a different president, had Biden been in the president a year earlier, maybe things would have gone better. But obviously but governments across the world have been criticized for the handling of the pandemic. It's clearly not gone as well as perhaps it should have. So, but the positive thing now is that, in my experience, I've had to be in America a couple times over the last 6 months, and comparing the first time to the second time, it was a dramatic change. And so, at least it feels like our government, the UK, is actually now really taking this seriously. It's like a little late to the party, but hey, at least you got here, right? So we'll see, but fingers crossed. So
yeah, brilliant. Well, that sort of brings us towards a close, Herb.
Okay.
Thanks so much. I actually genuinely feel like we could speak again for another half an hour on that. Maybe we'll do a part 2. I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
Once we know what's happening, but that would be great. But thank you very much. And
thanks for the invite.
really, really intriguing story. I've learned quite a bit there today, and I've just got all my fingers crossed for you and similar events organisers across the country. But hopefully this year will genuinely pan out the way we hope, and everyone can get back to normal, not more so than thinking digital. So we await how things develop, and best of luck for the future.
Hey, thanks a million. Thanks for the invite, and please send my regards to Hannah, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
All right, thanks, Herb. Take care.
Cheers, Steve.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.